The subject of the four phases is to a degree historical. Shaman in Asia had observed the yin-yang nature of the world we live in. The rising of the sun, setting, difference between day and night, yin being night and day being yang. Then you have the changing of the seasons between summer and winter, summer being yang, winter being yin. They then subdivided it into lesser yang, which is spring or morning, greater yang, which is summer, midday, afternoon, lesser yin, which is evening, and then greater yin, which is night. And they are also representing autumn and winter. They all knew this. Everyone understood that this was what was going on. But they then started to relate it to the activities of the homes they lived in, and saw that men needed light in the morning to get the gear ready to go out looking after their herds. Women needed it in the afternoon to cook, to sew and do their chores. So the house got divided up in relation to the way the sun came through the smoke hole in the top of the gur or yurt, a felt home used by Mongols. And the light projects, so if it rises in the east, and it's always going to be south, because most of China and Mongolia and places like that are northern hemisphere, so the sun is always to the south. So it rises in the east and is projected through the smoke hole onto the western side of the gur. And this is where the men keep their gear so they can get ready first thing in the morning, go out and look after the herds. It then progresses round to the back, furthest away from the door. And this is where the deities, the headman sits, the elderly. And then it moves round to the west. So the women can do sewing, cooking, so on. The door itself is considered, from the internal aspect of the home, to be the north. So the internal world is the reverse of the external world. South is outside of the door, and north is behind the back, where the elderly and the headmen sit. You'll notice today I'm not using a horse bow, I'm using a more modern recurve bow. Thumb ring can be used with both, as long as the bow is capable of coping with the extra draw length. So when you start dividing up activities in relation to yin and yang, male and female, then you start to look at personalities and the way all of these interact with each other. They divided the year into 12 stages, phases of the moon, so they could judge what they needed to do in the next month or the next quarter. And that allowed them to prepare for winter, allowed them to prepare for summer, so they could head off to grazing grounds in the winter, minimise the danger of the cold. So you can see that each activity in each month needs preparing for. In doing so, and dividing the year into 4 quarters, they're actually creating the 4 phases. And then as you look at the activities of men and women, their personalities, what type of work they have to do, the type of dangers, you then gradually start to build up a picture of what all this means. The interesting thing about shaman is that they were given a name, snakes, and it's believed it's because of the way they danced, the way they wiggled when they danced. Headmen or kings, who were also shaman, were called dragons. I find that interesting. It's not particularly a major thing for the 4 phases, but I just like to know these things. So as they've divided up the months, they also found they could divide up the day into 2-hour periods. These 2-hour periods, because unlike modern day people, they're aware of Qi. The ancient people were more aware of Qi, especially in the China and surrounding areas. They realized that Qi was stronger at certain times of the day. This allowed them to lay meridians out on the clock. When the energy was strongest, that was where the meridian was placed. One of the odd things is that the meridians relate to activities. Muscles have grown underneath them as we have evolved from a single cell organism. And the other thing to note about the single cell organism that we all evolved from is that we are made up of individual cells. All of those cells still exhibit the survival responses of the first cell. And the first cell had to be able to hunt, make contact with its food, eat that food, use that food, create a fleet to create new life. These 4 activities are what the 4 phases are about. They have a yin-yang nature. As we have evolved from this single cell, our emotions are linked to physical movements, physical expressions on our face. Each of these physical movements have evolved because meridians are just under the surface and connect to an internal organ, and then underneath them is muscles. Those muscles have evolved to perform the survival response of each of the 4 phases, of each meridian. So there came a time when there was a king who was imprisoned either by his overlords or by another tribe. His release was bought by his friends, family, either with promises or with wealth. But during the time he was imprisoned, he had to have figured out something about the four phases. If he was a dragon, shaman king, or shaman king, he would already know of the four phases. He would already know of Fuzi's pre-heaven Bagua layout of the bigrams. Picture please. Fuzi was a historical person who, sort of a demigod, who brought culture, writing, farming to the pre-Chinese people. This type of figure exists all the way around the world as someone who brings what basically is the beginnings of civilization. He's said to have seen the four bigrams on the back of a turtle as it emerged from a river, or a tortoise. He then assigns activities and purpose to each of these four symbols, but he subdivided them by adding another line to the symbol, either a yin or a yang line. This gives you 8 possible permutations of a 3-line symbol, the trigrams. Cue picture. You can see from this picture how they multiply with each added number. There is an ancient book in China called the I Ching. I Ching. But the Chinese say I Ching. The I Ching is used for prediction. We'll come to that later on. But the trigrams in Fuzi's layout, the pre-heaven layout of the Bagua, follow the seasons of the year, follow a sequence of creation. King Wen created his own layout, and his layout is called the post-heaven Bagua, or King Wen's Bagua. But his layout doesn't relate to the turning seasons. It doesn't relate to a creative activity. It actually relates to dynamic movements of energy. These will be explained in further videos, but they allow for a much stronger response when we encounter a threat than we would do if we just use the phases response. We use the polar opposite phases response instead. King Wen died after beginning war with the people who had, or the king who had imprisoned him. The war was continued by his sons, who won the war. Through them, through one of his sons and his grandson, they created an empire which was known as the Zhou Empire. Wow. Went straight anyway. The Zhou Empire continues for almost 1,000 years. Everyone was aware that the Zhou were doing something special. They had a book. This book, I gave the name of that book to the book that I wrote, the Zhouyi, spelled Z-H-O-U-Y-I. The Chinese don't have a J sound, so they use ZH, Zhou. When eventually the Zhou Empire collapsed, there was a period of 500 years of war. During that period, petty kings and lords, barons and so on set up strategy schools in the hope that they would be able to do what the Zhou had done and reunite the Zhou Empire. 500 years pass where all of this is going on. This is when Sun Tzu's Art of War is written. This period is known as the period of the Warring States. It is when the first emperor, who was born and lived the early part of his life in the same valley as the Zhou people came from. And I'm fairly certain knew of the four phases and the Zhouyi, may even have been able to have a copy or have it reconstructed. He then reunites the Zhou Empire and goes on a progression through the kingdom, the four directions of his kingdom, or four corners. He also creates a religion called the 4D. His name has four separate parts, four symbols, characters. No one in China had done this before. In some areas of China, 4 is seen as being an unlucky number. Perhaps there was good reason. Anyone who knew anything about the 4 phases, or the Zhouyi, would not have been safe from the first emperor. He would not allow anyone to have his knowledge for fear that they would use it against them. There are legends. One of them is an invader into China who every day used the I Ching, this other book, which was used as a divination book, being able to predict the future. He used it every day to make his war plans. He eventually invaded and conquered the whole of China. He proceeded to burn all of the books in the kingdom except for the Zhouyi, sorry, not the Zhouyi, the I Ching, and some books on farming and culture, and maybe metallurgy. Why would an invader who would use the I Ching to work out his battle plans allow the people he has conquered to have a copy of the same book? It doesn't make sense for him to do so. It only makes sense if the book they have, the I Ching they have, is not the one that he has. There was another legend of a first minister running into an emperor's throne room and throwing himself to the floor. Disaster, disaster, he says to the emperor. He says the back diagnostic books have been stolen. Prior to this, 2 officials of the court, highly respected, highly intelligent people, had locked themselves in a room and gazed at each other's naked backs and wrote down the back diagnostics. They were used to predict events and say what activities needed to be done to stop bad things happening, basically. The emperor sits there. First minister says, should we start burning all the books in the kingdom? The emperor thinks for a while and he says, no. What we should do is print more books, but we should scramble the information. The chances are that those scrambled groups became the I Ching, because they were not going to be the back diagnostics, and the back diagnostics may actually have been the Zhouyi. I have no proof of this, but it would make more sense out of these stories and the loss of the Zhouyi, which no one knows what it looks like, no one knows what it is. I don't know. What I have done in my book is show how I think the underlying information and theory behind the Zhouyi worked. And because if you understand how a person behaves emotionally given a certain circumstance, you can set them up with a trap. You can predict their reaction. And that's how to win wars, how to gain power and influence.